Hey everybody, sorry it has been so long. That is my fault. Yeah, it's probably pretty obvious that it's my fault. I don't know who else's fault it could be. But we have an amazing guest today, so hopefully that makes it up to you a little bit. We'll see how it goes. Today's guest is a world-renowned evolutionary biologist. She used to be a professor at Evergreen State College until her and her husband, Bret Weinstein, found themselves in the middle of a national controversy. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google's your best friend here. But it was pretty wild and ridiculous. It's not really the point of today's episode. Anyway, she is the author of Too Many Articles to Count, as well as the book Antipodes, Seasons with the Extraordinary Wildlife and Culture of Madagascar. She's also the co-author, along with her husband, of the forthcoming Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, Evolution, and the Challenges of Modern Life. She also co-hosts the Dark Horse podcast with her husband, Bret. Today, I talk with Heather Hying about the fickleness of memory, about being mugged at knife point in Quito, Ecuador, a time her and Bret road trip to Guatemala, and another time that her car set on fire. So it's ridiculous. We also talk about many other things. Look, here's the deal. Heather is a somewhat controversial figure. Sort of the point of the show. This is travel stories no one tells. It's designed to get folks to show up as being humans in a really meaningful way, using travel as a vehicle to get you there. So controversial people are part of the reason I do this show. Heather has a ton to contribute to the global conversation. She does it beautifully and she does it very well. So I really, really hope you enjoy the conversation today. See you out there. This is Baggage Claim, travel stories no one tells. I'm Will Conway. If you're enjoying Baggage Claim, subscribe. Mash the button, hit the bell, do the thing. This and every other interview comes with bonus questions. More fun conversation that's not in today's episode. Text MEMBER to 332-877-9540 or go to heybagageclaim.com/support. Let's get to it. All right, Heather, we're going to start by talking a little bit about your somewhat bizarre experience in Mexico and Guatemala in just a minute. But I want to start by reading something you wrote from an experience you had in Quito, Ecuador, where you were mugged at knife point. And you're an evolutionary biologist, and you have these beautiful passages that go into your own ability to recall in some of those moments. And so I want to read one of those before we get started. We do not have the processing power to take everything in, interpret it, and store it. We need editors to distinguish between all that might be perceived and all that is perceived, between what is perceived and what will be remembered short term, between that and what ought to be remembered long term. Also, in the role of file clerk, we need decisions made about which experiences are sufficiently regular and repeating such that new versions only rarely need updating, and which are sufficiently unique to be remembered as distinct experiences. We're always editing, attempts to become our fully conscious of our bodies and attentive to everything around us, promoted by myriad traditions throughout the world, will indeed provide a sense of greater time. And wouldn't it be so nice to see, feel, smell, hear everything at all times, to never miss the gorilla on the basketball court? But is it a good idea to try to override our internal editors? True, they may make us subjectively blind, make decisions for us regarding what to attend to, but those editors, at least some version of them, by their sensory linguistic or some other cognitive wizard, are necessary if we were to wander the world in anything but a haze of total bombardment. I read that for two reasons. One, you are a ridiculously good writer, and I love that passage. But two, I say that to set up a disclaimer about memory that I should probably set up more frequently on this show, which is that there really is no true subjective recollection of an event, right? Not one that we can conjure anyway. Our memories are sort of a false dashboard, right, of collected experiences remembered generally with a purpose, right? So it defines the way we think and behave and interact with the world going forward. Anyway, we'll get to Quito and talk more about that memory. I just wanted to set up that disclaimer and everything we talk about going forward, because these are inherently long-term memories.
It's a totally important disclaimer. And I think a lot of us actually will sometimes find ourselves saying about childhood, like, I actually have a memory of a memory. Like, I don't remember the thing, but I remember telling someone about the thing later, and that's the thing that I remember. And so that just tells you right away, like, we're just going layers and layers and layers deep.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Well, let's just follow this rabbit hole for a minute. It can be absolutely bizarre to remembering as sort of now you're 3 layers removed from reality, right? But I have frequently had this experience of returning to places that hold sentimental memory for me, places that are, every summer growing up, we'd go to Block Island off the coast of Rhode Island. And just these beautiful memories of what it was like to be there and what it felt like, but they're also tinged by adolescence and naivete and just the beautiful color palette of being a kid. And then I went back several years ago, and Block Island physically is still as beautiful as it ever was, but I was 27 years old at the time, and it was no longer in this pastel palette. It was now a part of my adult memory bank, which was sort of this bizarre rewiring. The place that existed in my memory existed in my memory and nowhere else, you know?
That's amazing. Like this will be quite a rabbit hole. You know, that piece that you read from, I specifically explore the nature of smell and memory. And, but what you were just evoking was about color. You know, like we think, I feel like our memories of childhood often are in some different palette. And I think also the fact that old movies are in a different palette. And so we have this sense of like what happened before didn't look like today, like literally wasn't in the same color scheme. And of course, that's not true. It's our perception that has changed, either our technological ability to perceive via the film that was being used, or just our developmental stage. So, you know, fascinating that all of these things will differ by both stage and by experience.
Yeah, I said something at the beginning that I actually, from an evolutionary perspective, would love your take on. Is it that, or do we know that what we remember and the way we remember experiences usually comes with a purpose? Like, we're remembering that bear attack because we remember how to fend off bears. I've never been attacked by a bear, but ridiculous hypothetical.
But you would, right? Like, you're certain that you would remember that.
I'm 100% confident I would recall being attacked by a bear. But because there are so many little moments that I recall that don't seem to have any particular utility one way or another, you know?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. You know, the short answer is I don't know, and I'm not sure that I don't think we know, meaning science, and I don't think we could know. Certainly the big events, the events that are clear to everyone upon, you know, hearing even the thumbnail, attacked by a bear. Yes, you're going to remember that, and everyone who knows you is going to remember that it happened to you as well. But yeah, with regard to some of the salient things that will show up from, for instance, your childhood or even just your past adult life, where, you know, I've been having this experience actually somewhat. There's been just a couple of not interesting moments that I have been walking and been recalled to them. Not because I was now in the same place. So it wasn't that sort of an obvious like deja vu, like I've already seen this thing right here before, but something prompted me to remember that. And you know, why did that, you know, non-interesting, hey, I had a conversation with a person I've never seen before or again that had not very much content in it, but I remember what they were wearing. Like, you know, why remember that thing when you probably have 80 experiences a day that could be just as easily remembered? And of course, 365 days a year. You know, I think once you've recalled it, then it rises up in the ranks, right? But what are those things that get remembered in the moment, that, you know, that pass the editors?
Mm.
that don't get edited out right away because they weren't relevant, and you can't possibly remember everything that you've ever experienced because you'll run out of space. You'll run out of the ability to do anything, do anything with your life, really. So, I don't know what for the things for which we can't identify why they're still on board, like why we still remember them, why those and not the others.
Right. If only to remember that there are mundane moments,
Yeah. So I mean, that's good. Maybe the idea is we have to recognize that the bear attack isn't the only thing that ever used to be in our life, right?
Right.
That the being mugged at knife point isn't the only thing that happened in Quito, right? So I do have other actually. And in fact, so we'll get back to that, but that moment that you're talking about there followed a day of walking around Quito with these students of mine. And I remember a lot of things about that day. And that day was the very first day of a 6.5 week study abroad trip that I was leading. And I remember a lot of things about that whole trip. But for any given day, that's the day that I remember the most about, even the parts of it that didn't involve trauma.
Yeah. Do you just intuitively feel in your bones that's because of this wild and intense event later in the day, or is I spend a long time backpacking South America, and vividly recall the first handful of days, probably more vividly than I recall any particular stretch that followed. And sometimes that's just new sensory input, new place, new way of adjusting, new, trying to find your footing. Maybe it's a combination. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Like I obviously in this particular story, I can't control for, it was the first day of many.
Right.
And it was certainly my first day with those students in that place, but it wasn't my first time there. I had already spent time in Quito when I was figuring out how to run the trip. And so, most of the places that we went that day, I had been before, but I hadn't been there with them under exactly those circumstances. So, I think it probably is some of both, but, and in this case, it's impossible to disentangle. Like those are two viable, hypotheses for why memories might be more on board from that day, and I think they're both probably true.
Yeah. It's becoming an interesting place to start. This podcast has actually been an interesting personal experiment in this for me. We're obviously doing an interview at the moment, but most of the show is actually these sort of short, highly produced stories, 10, 15, 20 minutes long, similar, written initially and then recorded. And if I'm on the beach, you'll hear sounds of waves in the background, those types of things, kind of this odd little ASMR energy to it. But the reason I say that is because each one of those stories is a very vivid memory that I've just bludgeoned to death by creative recreation and trying to make, life doesn't necessarily fit a 3-act structure so neatly. So rebuilding those stories, and in my head, they now have happened in the way that I tell them on the podcast.
Yep. That's exactly right.
What's bizarre is then people who were there go back and listen to them and they're like, dude, you left out this entire stretch, or the way that was just blatantly false. And sometimes, that was a result of taking creative license to a degree. But other times it was just the way I had created it in my head after all this time.
I guess two things. That piece in which I'm writing about the memories of being mugged with these 3 students in Quito, I talk a little bit about specifically before we talk, I talk about saying to my students in the exact aftermath, before we start talking about what just happened, please let's all take a moment to figure out what we think we know. Because I think I know a number of things now. And I would really like to have cemented that in my head before I start filling it with what you all think you know. And, some of the things in my case, just like you just said, I had no sound. My sound went out. So I have memory of sort of a slow motion visual, and apparently there was a dog that just was barking, 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 that was really increasing the intensity of the situation for my students anyway. And I don't remember it. I don't, it was not in view. And it's because I had no visual on it. I had no recollection of this at all. And, it was multiple reliable witnesses to the scene who said, no, what do you mean you didn't hear the dog? I'm like, okay, well then that was one sense that was just kind of offline. And the other thing is, I wrote a book many years ago, 2002, I think it was published, about my experiences in Madagascar, called Antipode. And I wrote it based on the journals I was taking at the time. Like I was doing research in Madagascar, and I was also writing, thinking a lot of these experiences I'm having are, I think are worthy of sharing with the world. So I was writing with the idea of recording the facts as they happened so that I could write about them later. And yet, when I now recall some things from my time in Madagascar, I often think, should I fact check against the book that I wrote at the, nearly at the time? And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. And I'm never way off, but sometimes my memory now of what happened is different from the memory that I record in the book. And I should probably trust myself then better than I trust myself now, but I don't know. In either case, it's me who had the experience who's now saying, I think this thing happened, and slightly different perspectives from the distance of time and recalling it just in voice as opposed to writing it down. Who is to say actually which of those memories is definitely going to be the more accurate one?
Okay, so for a time in South America, I traveled with a Danish guy who's a journalist, and he just doesn't believe that there is an objective truth in any place. He believes his job is to get to as close to some ideal form of understanding the way the world operates, but without this central pillar, which I have a hard time. I don't know how it would remain tethered to reality without a gut check of reality. But yeah, my question was going to be, does that ring true for you at all?
Oh, absolutely. Like, no. And this, I've said this, I remember saying this on stage recently, actually, like, I feel like I can talk to just about anyone for a long time and learn things from them. But if you fundamentally don't believe in an objective reality, I'm not sure where we can go from there. So I guess when you first said that, my question to you is, you traveled with this guy for a while. You got on with him. Like, how did that work?
Yeah. So he is actually probably my closest friend that came out of that. You can't road trip the coast of Chile for 5 weeks with somebody and not have them stick in your memory. But no, he, one of the most astute and observant and thoughtful people I've ever met. But when two people disagree about a recollection of something, he sort of chalks it up to relativism in a way that I couldn't quite get my head around.
And I guess, for you and for me, there's a third entity in the disagreement, right? There's the two people with memories, and then there's the thing that actually happened. And that, that third entity exists no matter whether or not there were observers to the thing that happened. It actually does. The tree falling does fall and does make the sound, even if there's no one there to hear it, right? It's not the reception of the sound that is the sound. And that doesn't mean that either of the two participants have inherently access to that underlying reality. And that also doesn't mean that once we're in social space, we are creating reality. And so, for me to say, no, I meant this, and my words therefore were meant to imply X, even if there's like a recording of the conversation, like that might be the objective reality, but like what it is that was existing at the subjective level, right? At the, my intentions, my emotions, the exchange between us, the chemical exchange, the physical exchange that doesn't have any record. Like, two people can actually really disagree about what their takeaway is. And it's not clear to me that in those cases, like if it's an entirely social exchange, there isn't inherently a truth that if they could just get to, then there would be something to agree on. But, with regard to anything with a physical property, was there a dog in that mugging in Quito that I had no awareness of until I was told that by my students? Yes, there was. And no amount of me saying, but I didn't hear it, makes that otherwise.
Yeah, right. And from our practical standpoint, impacted the situation in ways that probably impacted you in that moment, even if you weren't aware of a
Yes.
reality, right? So like
Exactly.
students were reacting in all sorts of different ways that they wouldn't had there been the dog. You might have been sort of at some internal level processing that there was a dog and that was increasing your angst, even if your recollection doesn't jive with that. There are all sorts of little things that this moment that we're in right now might have been slightly different. I mean, I believe in determinism, so I won't rewrite history, but yeah, every detail in what was actually present in that moment is relevant, right? It matters
Right.
for what ultimately happened. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hi there. My name's Will. You might have noticed that aside from my stupid dumb face and whatever YouTube throws at you, there are actually no ads on this podcast. That's the way I want it. The only way to keep this podcast going is for you to subscribe. So parts of this conversation and all my other conversations with folks like Bridget Fedesi, Ayla, Jacqueline Trumbull, who else have I talked to? Aliye Rizwi, whole bunch of others. All those conversations have little pieces that are not included in the core of the conversation. If you want access to those and you want access to extended immersive travel stories, you can become a member. To do that, text member to 332-877-9540 or go to heybagageclaim.com/support. All right, back to the show.
All right, so set me up. What happened here? You're on the Mexico-Guatemala border, and you're failing to get into the country.
I'm failing to get into Guatemala.
Yeah.
I'm being told, in fact, that if I am allowed into Guatemala, so I'll start in the moment, then I have to go back in the story for it to make sense. So I've come downriver with my then boyfriend, now husband, Bret Weinstein, and a number of like 3-4 Swedish tourists who we didn't know in a canoe. To get from Mexico into Guatemala in order to be, dropped at some, little border shack in the middle of the night, from whence we are then going to take a bus that will arrive some hours later and take us into the El Petén region of Guatemala, which is where Tikal is, the largest excavated Mayan city. And I am alone in this room with I remember a single swinging light bulb in this room with a concrete floor and open doorways to the outside, the sounds of the night insects outside, and this border guy, not particularly threatening, but my Spanish was terrible at the time, and he takes a look at my passport. And remember, we've come in on a river and there's no road back into Mexico. Like we've come down, back into Mexico, we've come down river. And he looks at my passport and he says, "I can't let you in." And I'm like, what are you talking about? He says, "If I let you in, you'll never be allowed to leave."
Wow.
And I had this experience. I'll explain the not as interesting backstory on like what he saw in my passport that made him say that to me. But
at this point, you have to be a fugitive or a serial killer or something.
Right. But like he'll let me in, but then I can't leave. And I had this sense, this is the first time, and I hope, and I think the last, that I was ever conscious of having a sense of, but I'm an American. Like, really? Like I certainly, I can't get stuck in a place. Certainly the fact of being, of having had, and I recognize it as luck, just the luck of having been born into a country that had all of these resources and proclaimed to care about its citizens, that I wasn't, and I wasn't a fugitive and I wasn't a serial killer and all of this, right? I wasn't a criminal. Like certainly that couldn't happen, but I also had no rejoinder in the moment. It's like, well, like, what am I supposed to do? I was like, I can't swim back upriver. Like, what do you mean? Like, I literally have no choice. I've come in on this river. And ultimately he said, you're right. You have no choice, but I don't think you're going to be allowed to leave the country. So let me back up to explain how I ended up in that unexpected situation, which is that Bret and I, my boyfriend at the time, had taken a road trip. We decided we were going to explore Mexico and Central America over the summer.
If you don't mind, I want to go back further. You and Bret dropped out of school together, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, we did. We were not college dropouts at this point, so we only dropped out.
Okay.
So we dropped out for a year. I was at Smith College and he was at Penn, and it wasn't working for either of us for reasons that I could go into, but it's not really about travel. And we had adventures along the way for sure. I mean, in fact, we were in his Ford Bronco driving west after having left our East Coast schools in the middle of a freak snowstorm in November in Nebraska when the truck caught fire and flames started coming out of I didn't know we were going here, but flames started coming out of the vents, and we were just spelling each other. So we were driving straight through, and I happened to be driving at the time, and he was asleep. And I was like, Brett, like, oh my God, the Bronco's on fire. And so I pulled over, had probably seen way too many, stupid Hollywood versions of what happens when a car catches fire. And so, grabbed the one bag that had our cash and most of our clothes in it out of the thing. And Bret then starts trying to flag down, trucks on the highway, but it's late at night. It's snowing. These big rigs are just going by. Finally, he manages to flag one down. They call the fire, the firemen. And by then, the entire, the flames are visible above the hood. They're coming into the car. And it turns out there was some work we had done with the onboard computer that had caused a short that caused this fire, and it totaled this car in the middle of Nebraska. By
the way, just from the perspective of making sure people know when we are, you just said you had to flag somebody down to make the phone call.
Yes.
What year are we in here?
So that would have been 89. That was we were in college, and we dropped out of college, and that was 1989. So yeah, some people probably had those giant brick cell phones at that point, but no one we knew did. But big rig truckers had CB radios, right? So that was who he was trying to flag down, exactly. And so that was the sort of the beginning of our adventures in life together, right there, which helped.
Not a bad way to start.
Not a bad way to start, aside from having almost everything that we owned becoming totaled in this car fire, and then we ended up going back to school. We were at UC Santa Cruz, and this trip that we were on together was between, I don't know, I guess our junior and senior years of college. And we had thought that we would pay for it with money we had saved, and I was going to sell my car, which was this was 91, and I had a 1978 Toyota Corolla. So this was my first car. I'd gotten it when it was already 8 years old or something, and it was fine, except it had a ragtop roof, which I'd never even seen anymore. But it had one of these roofs that rolls back so that it's sort of a convertible, but it's not really. But someone had slashed it at one point, and I had duct taped it. And so when it rained, it kind of rained inside. So it was not a great car.
The resale is not high.
The resale was not high, exactly. So I was trying to sell it to have money for the trip,
right.
and no one was taking. We were in LA. I grew up in LA, and I was offered $200 for it. I'm like, $200 is not going to get me through Central America. So we decided, you know what? Let's just drive it down. Let's drive it down. And at whatever point it stops working, we'll unload it, right? Yeah. So we started driving it down, but somewhere in Texas, two of the tires blew, and we had to replace them with very expensive tires. That was the only thing available. I think that was in Texas, or maybe that was already Mexico. And then the starter motor blew, and we had to get that fixed. And there was just like a number of things like, oh my God, we're now spending all of the money. And so we're going to have to try to sell this thing. And in fact, when we got the starter fixed, the awesome guy in, I don't remember what state in Mexico, but somewhere in northern Mexico, who fixed it for us, said, this is actually, these cars run forever. These 1970s, 80s Toyotas, they run forever. I would totally buy it from you. We're like, no, we're going to keep it for a while, but, tell us why. It feels like it's got this, leak in the roof. He's like, no worries. Like, we can fix that. This is the sort of car that people who work on cars can keep running forever. So, this has value. So we had decided, okay, you know what? We're gonna try to sell it then to recoup the money that we've put in. Yeah. And we tried to sell it in someplace Chetumal maybe in Mexico, and had been told it was legal, but then we're told, I don't remember if it was a policeman or not, but someone was like, you know what, it's actually not legal for Americans to sell cars in Mexico, but it is in Guatemala. It is in Guatemala. Like, okay, let's go to Guatemala. But we had heard about this amazing way into Guatemala via this river, right? And obviously you can't take a car and a canoe. So we're like, okay, we're going to go into Guatemala. We're going to go to this town called Huehuetenango. We're going to try to sell the car. And then we'll come back into Mexico and re-enter Guatemala on this amazing epic river trip. And so we went to Huehuetenango and we, put a se vende, for sale, se vende, nuevo arranque, for sale, new starter motor, on the car in the central square, and sat around being, the young gringos who were trying to sell a car just to recoup what we put into it. And this law student wanted it. And he said, okay, but let's make it totally legal. Let's go to an actual lawyer and get all the paperwork written up. And you're going to have to pay for that. I'm like, okay, good. And we did it. And at the end of selling this car legally with this lawyer in Guatemala and Huehuetenango, we said, okay, what about our copies of the paperwork? And they said, no, you don't need that. That's just on our end. Okay. So we went back through the border crossing.
Sounds like a Chekhov's gun right there.
Yeah, exactly. But we didn't know. So we went back into Mexico with no one stopping us at all, because no one checked our, we were clean cut looking young gringos going, backpacking. We had backpacks, and it just looked like we were doing what a lot of people were doing then. Yeah. And it wasn't until this late at night moment in this open air shack at the border with no way back into Mexico, what would have been a week or two later, that I was told, actually, they never should have let you out of Guatemala without that paperwork. But if you don't find the guy, find the lawyer, and now at this point you have to take him and the paperwork to the border in order to actually leave the country, you're basically stuck here forever.
My God.
Yeah. And I was like, I can't find the lawyer in this big city in Guatemala that we sold a car to one afternoon, 2 weeks ago. Like that's not going to happen. So how am I going to get, really? I'm going to be stuck here forever. So finally the border control guy said, well, I see I have no choice. I'm going to stamp you through, but I don't know what you're going to do. So I went and found Bret and the Swedish tourists, who were like, where have you been? I'm like, get this. Like, apparently I'm stuck in Guatemala. Like, what do I do? I've got this one page in my passport that's a stamp that says you brought a car into Guatemala, right? Like, that was the thing that he saw in my passport, that I'd brought a car into Guatemala. And his point was, where's the car? I said, well, I sold it. I sold it legally. No, you need the paperwork and the lawyer in order to prove that you sold the car, or else you need to have the car, or else you can't leave Guatemala. So we're like, well, do I declare my passport stolen and spend time in Guatemala City with the consulate and get a new passport? Do I deface my passport and rip out that page? No, that's a felony. Like, you don't do that. So we then proceeded to have a number of other adventures in Guatemala exploring. And at some point I'm like, Bret, I feel like we're due to head south. We're due to go into Honduras. What are we going to do? Do we go back to Guatemala City and deal with that hassle? That's, who knows how long that's going to take to get a new passport. And he said, I think I've got a plan. So just don't disagree with what I say at the border and follow along. Like, okay, man. I trust you. Let's see what happens. So we're approaching the border on foot. I think we'd probably taken a bus to close, but at least at that point, at the Central American countries at the borders, you have to get out and cross them on foot.
Right.
And so we walk up, two of us again, we cleaned ourselves up. We looked, we didn't look like grungy backpackers. We looked like, respectable, gringo backpackers, just, doing what they do. And,
you didn't look like backpackers. You looked like backpackers in button downs. There's a difference.
There it is. Yeah, exactly. And so we've done this intentionally, right? We cleaned ourselves up. So we're backpackers and button downs, which is not something I'd heard, but yeah, that's exactly it. And
I made that one up.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I love it. Yeah. We didn't actually have any button downs with us. And in fact, this is maybe not interesting, but the reason I was alone in that room late at night with this border agent, the reason like the other guys weren't still there with me when they'd gone ahead, is I was like digging through my stuff and I discovered that the last lavanderia, the last laundry place that I'd taken my laundry to, had stolen half my clothes. And it was the first time I'd had anything like that happen. I really had so little of that happen in all of my travels. And I had this like dress it was like the one nice thing that I had that was really, I was fond of, and it was gone. And, a bunch of my, like quick dry underwear was gone. I was like, oh my God, I'm so frustrated. So I was just already in this mood of like, just go on, guys. I'll get through customs. And that's why I was like alone in the room with these guys. So I don't know what, button downs I might have had with me at that point, since I didn't have as much clothing as I'd started with. But we get up to the guy, and this is between Guatemala and Honduras in 1991. So there's a ton of armed dudes on both sides of the border, and there's one serious looking military guy behind the glass in this booth. And Bret takes my passport and opens it up to a page I can't see, and says in his somewhat better Spanish than mine at that point, I'm so sorry, senor. We have a problem, and we just are trying to get into Honduras, but we have a problem with my girlfriend's passport. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? Like, we've been told we're not going to be able to leave the country if you show him this. And it turns out he had opened it up to the page from the first time we had entered Guatemala, or no, the second time we'd entered Guatemala, rather, when it didn't say we had a car with us, and it was smudged. It was like slightly smudged. And Bret's saying, we're so sorry. We know how important it is to be, by the book. And I'm not sure if you can totally read here that we came in at this checkpoint. And the guy's saying, oh gosh, no, it's totally okay. You're fine. I just, I see people coming through all the time who are trying to get through with other stuff, but this is not a problem. We know that sometimes we can't totally read what happened at the border, but no, this is good. He stamps it. He doesn't look at any of the rest of my passport and lets me through. And I was like, well, as long as I don't try to re-enter Guatemala on that passport, I'm now a free person.
Bret is a genius. Oh my God. A misdirection of David Spade proportions. That was exceptional. We had talked about this story last time, but I had not heard the end. Oh my God.
That's right. Yeah, it was extraordinary. Yeah. And he is now known in the world. And
did I say David Spade proportions? That's not what I meant.
You did. Did you mean David Sedaris? Is that what you?
No, I meant who the hell's the magician?
Oh.
Ah, shit.
Yeah, I can't think either. Yeah.
David,
I feel like Sedaris.
Somebody.
Yeah, David somebody. I feel like Sedaris might do like misdirection as well, but maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, that would be wonderful too, but that would be much more literary.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be into that.
Yeah, so that I've never seen him do anything like that again, but the ability to take a really untenable situation and just say, okay, no one is going to be harmed by this, right? Like, this is actually good for everyone. Like, we did this all by the book. We happened to get one piece of bad advice from the lawyer who didn't give us the paperwork that we needed. Now we're stuck. Why make more bureaucratic and time wasting hassles for everyone? Let's do a little bit of misdirection and get on through.
It's very sharp. That was very sharp. if you ever sell a car in Guatemala, listeners, we have some advice for you. You've
Yes.
learned one thing in this podcast, so that's productive.
Indeed.
How did you and Bret meet? Because you guys dated for like you had been dating since high school, if it was something like that.
We were friends in high school. We met.
Yeah.
He came to the school that I was at. I've been at since 7th grade in 11th. So we met in 11th grade. And we were friends for several years, and then we got together between sophomore and junior year at the point that I was transferring to Smith. So my ill-fated time at Smith was only 5 weeks long, and he'd been at Penn for a couple of years. But yeah, that event in Nebraska with the snowstorm and the Bronco burning up was only a few months into our relationship.
Yeah. It's, I mean, I'm of the mind that adventures and misadventures, especially early in a relationship, create such cohesion that it's very difficult to, just creates a bond that becomes.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, spending 5 weeks traveling together. You'll never not know each other at some level. Right. And you may not, excuse me, you may not choose to continue an active relationship with whoever it is, but whenever, if ever they come back into your life at all, there'll be a recognition. Like you just remember when, and you will have memories. You will be able to immediately recall some things from those times that you had together that were so outside of the normal scope of your daily life.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's also the driving force behind the show, right? Is the idea that travel has a tendency to let you and listeners in on a little secret. I like travel. But I'm not like but I'm not like an obsessive passport stamp collector. Like I don't operate in quite that way. What I like about travel is that it really serves as a beautiful plot device to unpack who a human is at their core. You end up in bizarre situations frequently. What you just described, I have several border stories of my own, almost all of my own doing. And, you end up in these bizarre situations, some quite dangerous, some less so, some beautiful and romantic and just visceral, and you remember it in a similar color palette to the way you remember childhood. And when those things happen, especially consecutively, the beautiful moments tend to follow the terrifying ones in my experience. And you see somebody operate in dire straits, even if they have the most wonderful life back home, none of that matters if they're being held at knife point in Quito, right? Or drowning off the coast of Ecuador or Colombia in my case. And so you get a deep understanding of who a human being is. And there's such beauty in that. Especially when you see them respond really positively in a way that impresses you. It's hard to, I don't know, it's just hard to undo that commitment to a person.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I also agree that I do want to go a lot of places, but it's not about the list, it's not about, as much as I could probably tell you the countries that I've been without, I might miss a couple off the top of my head. Like I don't keep the ongoing list in my head, but I'm sure it's there somewhere. It's not the driving force. And additionally, the ability to just see how many different ways human beings are making a go of it in the world, the universality of experience, like at one level, the totally distinct and unique nature of daily life when you're traveling and of the daily life of the people you're seeing is extraordinary. And then also and we're all one, like we're all human, we're all doing this thing and in totally different ways, in ways that if you've never been more than 50 miles outside of your hometown or outside the borders of your own country. As much as for Americans, it's easy to travel within your own country and actually explore a lot of different cultures. Not that a lot of us do that, but going outside of your own country and, the more outside you can go, the better. Outside of your own hemisphere, outside of your own language, regardless of whether or not you think you have facility with languages or not. Like I don't. Like, I'm great in English, and I've got enough Spanish and French and a tiny bit of Malagasy on board to get by. And when I spent time in Turkey, I just enough words to make it clear that I wasn't an asshole, right. Right. But that's it. Like it doesn't come naturally to me. And does that make it a little more fraught if you're engaging with people in a language that you really don't know very well? Right. Yeah. On the other hand, I mean, maybe this is the animal behaviorist in me, because that's one of the things I am, is an animal behaviorist. Us using words is all very well and good, but it often covers what's actually going on. And so if you can walk around a scene and actually not be able to understand most of what people are saying and just watch what they're doing, you see the universality of human emotion and wants and needs and hopes and desires in a way that if you were listening to what they were telling you about what they were doing and why they were doing it, might be obscured. So it's extraordinary to go any day that I'm someplace I've never been before. I just feel like this was enough. Right. Yeah. And even locally, frankly, like I was paddleboarding on a river I'd never paddleboarded on yesterday, right here, 10 miles from where I live. I didn't know the river existed. I was like, good. Okay. Even though it's no difference in culture, really no difference in anything, because it's a river that flows into the river that I usually paddleboard on. Right. Like it's not really that different. Like, I didn't know this was here. Cool. Now I'm here.
Hey there, me again. Same message as before, but I'm going to say it in different words. If you're enjoying this conversation and you want access to behind-the-scenes, sneaky, extra conversation from this chat, that was poorly phrased. Whatever. Text member to 332-877-9540 or go to heybagageclaim.com/support. Also, if you're not already, you're like 45 minutes into this episode, just subscribe to my channel already. Come on. Okay. Go enjoy the conversation. Goodbye.
I have like 6 directions I want to take you. One thing I just want to confirm that I feel so deeply that you said, which is the weird paradox between going other places and seeing such a radical shift in the way people live and behave and act, and this cultural norms in particular places being so weird, even to your point, the United States, but also the difference between Greenwich Village and Midtown. Like you can get it pretty quick. But yeah, of course, you get on a plane to Mongolia and hop out in Ulaanbaatar and then see the way people operate there. You're going to have an entirely different experience than Chicago or New York or wherever you are. And so at one level, you get this radical difference. But at the other level, at another hand, I don't know, I lost my metaphor there, but it doesn't necessarily happen consciously, but subconsciously, you're building sort of a model for what the lowest common denominator is, what the universal factors are for what it means to be human. And then I don't know, I think I've had more sort of like peak ecstasy level sober experiences on that recognition alone of like, yes, they are a hyper Catholic Colombian 55-year-old woman. I can't relate to that experience at some level, but this clerk at the grocery store is taking way too long and it's pissing them off just the same way it pisses me off, and there's those little moments become so beautiful, right?
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
No, and by and large, the willingness of people, when you travel with grace and openness, the willingness of other people to respond with grace and openness and to see the humanity in the traveler. I have only rarely been met, and frankly, was traveling in Central America in the early 90s when the U.S. had a very recent history of being, very, very nasty there.
Pretty
exactly.
Pretty
in Nicaragua, we got on a bus at one point that same trip, and there were only 2 seats, and seeing gringos get on the bus, a woman spit on the seat next to her, the empty seat next to her, so that I wouldn't sit down. I thought, I wish that hadn't happened. And I'm not that American. And, I didn't vote for any of that, but God, like, came in and killed a lot of your people. I totally get it. And I am so sorry,
People being humans as they should, right? Like if I was 30 years old in 1948 and I met a German guy, I wouldn't really care if he voted for who he voted for, what he did, or how he behaved in his prior 30 years. I probably would feel some visceral.
Right. Absolutely.
There was another, you had several elements to what I thought was a really beautiful monologue. Another one was this idea of that place 10 miles away that you went paddleboarding recently.
Yeah.
And just it being different from your normal routine, the place you tend to go. You've paddleboarded on another river 10 miles away that has a slightly different view of the same mountain, and right, those types of things.
Yep.
Is the answer from a human perspective or from an evolutionary standpoint if you want to, but do you think why do people crave change? Why do people crave different environments? Where does that come from?
Well, I mean, some of it, there's got to be a lot of different answers, and I'm sure I won't touch on, I may miss the most important ones here, but the first thing that comes to mind is that it affords an ability to compare. So it's like, this is going to sound like the evolutionary part, but like, why do we have 2 ears and 2 eyes? It's in order to correct. So it's what gives us depth perception in vision and sound perception, really depth perception still in sound, is that if you totally block one of your ears, it's very much harder to actually tell how far away and in what direction the sound is coming from. And so if you take sort of your life as the thing, your understanding of the universe and of yourself as the thing that you're trying to get perspective on, putting yourself in a different place and thus getting perspective from a different vantage point gives, just affords a new view in. And sometimes there will be nothing that you're conscious of that changes. And some, like you say, like I've never been to Mongolia, but you land, you take a plane there and you land, and it's going to be really shocking right away, what it is that you're, how different it is. But as you know, and we haven't talked about this, so I'm about to claim that that you will have experienced this thing, and I'll be interested if you haven't. But my experience and that of at least all of the students of mine who I took on study abroad who told me so, and I predicted this to them in advance, was that when we go to Panama for 5 weeks or Ecuador for 6 weeks or 11 weeks or whatever, a ton is different, and you're going to feel homesick, and all of these things will happen. But the culture shock is actually on the way back. The culture shock is when you land back home and you see all of the things that you only ever had the one view on before, and now you have this other experience with which to view it. And that's one part of the culture shock. And the other part of the culture shock is all of the people you left behind who weren't on the trip with you, who ask you the questions that aren't the right questions and can't figure out how to get into your head, and don't know why you're transformed. Like that, you'll feel more alienated and lonely potentially, and it'll fade. And hopefully you can bring the people who didn't go with you on the trip into the fold enough to share. And I think that's part of what you're doing here, such that the transformation that happens in travel isn't viewed by those who didn't travel as a betrayal, which I think sometimes it can be viewed as.
The first time I seriously left the country is not an experience I talk about very frequently on this show or in life. I was 17 years old, and it was billed as sort of a generic. I went to a Jesuit prep school, billed as sort of a generic prep school mission trip style experience. But one thing, my experience, mixed feelings on religion and the legacy of Catholicism, but one thing that I felt the Jesuits in particular do really well is sort of indoctrinate curiosity and thoughtfulness in a
You're right.
really, really beautiful way. And
I don't think I've ever heard indoctrinate curiosity as a phrase before, but I think you're right.
yeah, that's basically the only positive word that can possibly come after indoctrinate, really. But yeah, so we went, mission trip was Guayaquil, Ecuador. We were in a slum outside Guayaquil called Duran, which is, I haven't been to enough places to compare, but I spent a lot of time in South America years and years later, a decade later. And this was by far the poorest that I ever saw. Granted, backpackers don't necessarily end up in the places that 17-year-olds on mission trips do, but yeah, it was absolutely life-changing. And to touch back on the Jesuit point, there was no school to build. There was no like English to teach. We weren't doing anything like that. They were like, you guys, you are idiots. You are 17-year-old morons. The only reason you're here is because you have been blessed with all sorts of opportunities in your life going forward, by absolutely no creation of your own. And you prep school in Connecticut, most of you guys are going to go be like finance assholes and various things. And if this changes the way 2 or 3 of you think about the rest of the world, we're in business, right? That's a positive outcome. And so your job here is to sit down, shut up, and listen, basically. And we did. We played soccer for like 5 hours a day with the kids on hot asphalt and Ecuadorian sun in April, which is not, yeah, it's a little toasty.
Yeah.
100 minimum, a little humid. It was rough. And I have this vivid memory, which I touch on in one episode of the podcast, of a nun who'd been down there. She'd opened this school. It was essentially like a charter school would be the easiest way to describe it, but it was all very, very poor kids who had shown streaks of brilliance in various ways who were in the school. And she sat us down on the hot asphalt one afternoon. I will never forget this line. She said, "With the privilege you have been given, you have no right to fail."
Wow.
Talk about a moment that sticks. That one is in there forever. It's just a beautiful and a somewhat terrifying sentiment. Like, you don't only owe it to these humans who you're seeing around you. You also owe it to your family, to your grandfather who came over from Ireland, to all those types of things, right? Yeah. I have no idea how the hell I got on this tangent. Where was I at the beginning of this?
I mean, that's amazing. I guess you were going to be talking about a trip. You said the trip that you haven't talked about very much, but I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't know why it came up. Maybe that's why it came up. It's extraordinary. With the privilege you've been granted, you have no excuse to fail. You have no
right to fail.
No right to fail. Yeah. No right to fail. Yeah. That's extraordinary. I guess I would just, the only caution I would add to that is, like globally, right? Like we all have to be, empower ourselves to make choices that might not work, so that we fail locally in service of doing something better. Because if we can't make mistakes as we proceed, then whatever we succeed at won't be as terrific as it could otherwise have been.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point. The thing I've spent a lot of time thinking about right now is really, in various fields, you can begin at a certain starting point in terms of just innate natural talents, right? I will never, I could have dribbled the basketball 25 hours a day for my entire childhood. I wasn't going to the NBA. That was never going to happen. I would have to be 9 inches taller and 3 times more athletic. It just wasn't occurring. but on things that you start with a natural proclivity for at the very least, or come in somewhere around the 50th percentile, at that point it's just about hours and taking the shots time after time after time. Eventually the number of at-bats will line up with a home run. It's it's a time frame conversation.
Yeah, no, exactly. The tenacity that enough of the hurdles have to be gotten out of the way, like a little bit of latent skill, whatever it is, and opportunity sufficient to then be able to spend the time.
Right. That's exactly right. Did you I know he's kind of got the pop science thing going on, but did you read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers?
It's been a while, but yeah.
He had this, he was talking a lot about the hockey players who made it. And he found this interesting study that they had basically everybody in the NHL, with limited exception, was born between the months of like January and March. And then it tails off into April. And then it's basically nobody throughout the rest of the year who actually makes it to the pros. And they basically figured out it was because when they were 7 years old, they were aged a year up from everybody else. They had 8 months head start in terms of body growth. So they were a little bit bigger, a little bit faster, a little bit stronger. They were making the travel teams and getting positive reinforcement for hockey. So these kids, obviously being born in January doesn't guarantee you go play in the NHL.
Right.
But being born in July pretty much guarantees you're not going to be.
That's extraordinary. Yeah. And so, there's no one to blame for that. Right. But there is just this background noise to our experiences and what we are granted. And some of them, no one has any control over. So, we should be working to provide as equal an opportunity to everyone as possible, while recognizing that sometimes things like birth month and whether or not you end up, playing professional soccer might actually be correlated, as absurd as that sounds on the face.
Right. All right. So let's, we will have more lovely digressions, I'm sure, in a little bit. We've talked enough about the Quito incident that people are curious. Set me up. Why are you in Quito? What's going on there?
Yeah. So I was leading my first, I'd done a couple study abroads in Panama, and I had decided to switch it up to Ecuador.
You are a professor at Evergreen.
Yeah.
At this point,
so I was a professor at Evergreen State College, which I loved until suddenly I didn't, which is not something we'll go into here today. But
folks can Google that if they want to, but that's its own saga.
That's its own saga. That kind of travel, such as it is, I don't recommend at all. But I was a professor at Evergreen for 15 years, and I did several study abroad trips there. And I didn't do plug and play at all. I created them completely from scratch. And I had done a couple in Panama, and the field station where I was basing them at Panama was moving and was in flux. And so I thought Ecuador. And actually, Bret and I and our boys I had arranged a site scouting trip the summer before for 3.5 weeks, just to go to a bunch of the places we might go. And I had decided, this will work. So this is only my second time in Ecuador. I'm now there. I can't remember. I think it was about a 6.5 week trip. We were going to go on this trip. We were not going to Galapagos. Galapagos is super expensive, and I had never been yet. But we were going to the Amazon. We were going up into the Andes. We were going to the coast, to Isla de la Plata, which is sometimes called poor man's Galapagos, which has some of the same stuff, but you can get there on a day trip. I think everyone had to have shown up in Quito by that Sunday night. And then the curriculum that I'd written, we were going to, spend time at the botanical garden on Monday, and then actually traveling to the Cloud Forest site on this Tuesday. And some people had begun to show up and had gotten rooms at the hostel where we were all staying on Sunday night a few days early. And I had shown up on Saturday night, so just one day early. And at breakfast that morning at the hostel, maybe half the students are already there. And we've got a free day. It's not the trip yet. And I think I had 21 students on this trip. And I knew them well. I'd already been working with them. This would have been in January. So I'd already been working with them since September. We'd done domestic field trips in the state of Washington. So I knew these guys well, and I trusted them. And 3 of them at breakfast at the hostel that morning asked me what I was going to do. I said, I'm just going to explore. I'm just going to wander around Quito, as one does, if one has that sort of bug in them. And they asked if they could come with me. And I said, I thought about it. I thought, there's one part of me that thought, I love being alone. I love exploring alone. And this is my last day to be alone for 6 weeks. But I also, I also really like these guys. And I said yes. And it would have been totally easy for me to say no, but I said yes. And so it's 2 young men and 1 woman and me wandering around Quito for the whole day. We got some local food, and we explored this planetarium, or this it was like a science and astronomy museum. And near the end of the day, we're thinking, okay, we've wandered far enough from the hostel. Maybe we should begin to think about turning back around and going back, walking back. And I see this long flight of stairs, and I'm sure I feel a little bit differently about long flights of stairs in cities after this, but certainly up until that point, it was very difficult for me to ever turn down the opportunity to walk up a flight of stairs that I couldn't see the end of. Like, what is up there? What will I discover at the top?
Okay, so this, for folks who haven't spent time in South America, this is absolutely an addiction of mine as well. And there are a couple things worth noting here, and Heather, fill in the blanks where it doesn't align with your experience. But the why are there stairs here, and why does that matter? There's many of these cities, I believe, I actually haven't been to Quito, so correct me if I'm wrong, but many of these cities are built into canyons or valleys, and the stairs sort of represent an exiting of city proper and into it's kind of like little barrios and these little sort of side areas. And if you stick to the staircase area, generally speaking, you're safe. It tends to get a little rougher in those places, but it also tends to be, in my experience, where you encounter people who aren't expecting you there. And most of the time, that's really beautiful. Most of the time, that's a really cool experience. Because you end up interacting with people that the guidebook didn't tell you about, and ways of thinking, and a leather worker at the top of the set of stairs in Cusco one time. It was the coolest little things, right? Anyway, just a little color there.
Yeah, no, that's great. I forget that people don't know the stairs, the Latin American stairs. And now that I'm thinking about it, the other places I've been in the world aren't as sort of illustrated by the stairs the same way that much of Latin America is. Specifically, my experience in South America is fairly limited, but I think more in South America even than in Central America. So we're walking up, and I've already decided, I've already sort of thinking about getting back, right? So at the top of the stairs, we're going to turn right, and then we're going to start navigating our way back, and we're a few miles from the hostel, but we'll do it. And I always smile and say hello to people when I pass them in Latin America, unless it's a very crowded street, right? Unless there's a lot of people around. There was one guy, the stairs were mostly abandoned, almost entirely. And there was one guy that passed us near the top on the way down, and he looked sort of grim, young, looked a little grim. And I said, hola or buenas, something to him. And he just looked at me. And I wouldn't have remembered that if what happened next hadn't happened, right? I feel certain of that, although I can't prove it. But I recorded it as, that's not usually what people do. They at least smile. They say buenas back, hola, whatever. And not very many minutes later, we get to almost the very top of the stairs, the last sort of plateau before you turn out into the street. And this guy comes running around the corner, and the guy he's with is the person we had passed on the stairs. The main guy has a giant knife scar down the side of his face, sort of running 45 degrees, and he's got a knife. And he basically, they hurt us. They separate us. One of my students, one of my male students, is a very large guy, not fat, but very, strong and muscular, and he looks imposing. And so they separated him off, and they separated the other guy off too. And then they had me and my female student up against this wall, and two of us had nothing visible on us. So I had gone out into the city in the way that I know how to do when I'm trying not to draw attention to myself. But right. I hadn't thought. This was for all of my students their first time, I think, traveling outside of the country, but certainly the first time in Latin America. And one of my female student was a photographer, and she had her beautiful camera on her. And I had not told her to, nor had I wanted to, nor had I really thought to say, maybe don't have your camera as we're walking into certain areas. So she had a backpack with the rest of her gear and her camera around her neck, nice Canon SLR, right? And they pinned me and her up against this wall, and this guy just starts doing this like crazy knife dance. He's like dancing in front of us, clearly just trying to intimidate us, and lifts the camera off my student's neck and takes her backpack, and throughout this, I hear nothing. Like I said, it was like slow motion, and I'm hearing nothing. And I'm just watching this, and I'm sort of making eye contact with the people I know. I can't really make contact with my female student because she's right next to me, but I'm watching this thing. And they run. And suddenly it all comes back. Like the noise comes back, the color comes back. Everything was also, I think it was in black and white, right? Like I can't, I have no check on that because I know it wasn't actually in black and white. And all I could do is like, it felt like it suddenly came into Technicolor. It suddenly came into noise, and a lot of noise, because suddenly there was a dog barking, and there were people yelling. And where did those people come from? And I sort of come to myself, and I'm sure this was a dumb move, but my older student, the big guy, and I both gave chase. We chased these guys, and
you say in your writing that you have no recollection of doing that. You don't have a recollection of recalling doing that. It's only been communicated to you in hindsight.
Right. But what I came to be aware of myself in a different spot than I had been, in the street, on the one guy who had taken the smaller backpack, taking the backpack from him as he dropped it and continued to run. And Jeremy, my other student who had given chase, had chased down the guy with the camera equipment. And he had dropped that, and he had dropped the knife in the street, and he had also run off. And now somehow it's like we're now on the top of the stairs in this, like, on the street, and there's these balconies, and there's all these people. There are all these people out there. And now they're making noise, and they're yelling about the guys who are getting away and what happened to the gringos. And one of the things I'm thinking is, like, where were they? Like, where were they when we were just getting mugged at knife point? Like, what happened? And like, we were a little farther down the stairs. We weren't completely out in the street when it was happening, but the story goes on and on and on. But one of the things that became clear is that these two thugs who mugged us unsuccessfully, as it turns out, right, are people that the neighborhood knows and wish would be stopped. And they
causing all sorts of mayhem.
They're causing all sorts of trouble. These weren't opportunistic on gringos who the neighborhood would be like, fine, whatever, it's just the gringos, we don't care. And I'm not saying that any of those people would have felt that way, but you can imagine if you're living in such a neighborhood, right? Like, either these are locals who are terrorizing us too, or these are locals who were like petty assholes who are going after gringos when they show up with a nice camera in our neighborhood. Right. And it wasn't that second thing. They were opportunistic on us, but they were also really creating mayhem in the neighborhood. And
do you I don't know how into any of the investigation you got, but is there any cartel or gang connection to any sort of nefarious network, or were these just two independent actor assholes.
No idea. The only thing I know is that, after we got our stuff back, and I said to my students, just don't talk to each other for a couple minutes. Like, again, like I said before, like figure out what you think you know. And then let's begin to talk. In the middle of that, like, okay, we're actually bizarrely, like, people are yelling and the guys have run off and we've got our stuff back and we're not talking to each other because I've asked us not to, which seems really awkward, but I think it was necessary. Into that scene, and it's a cobblestone street. These two cop cars come screaming up and like screech to a halt, and they've got their sirens on, and they get out and they run off after the guys. It's like, 3 or 4 minutes later or something. Like, a little late, guys, don't you think? But they caught him. Yeah. And so they did catch him, and they bring them back, and they present them to us. They're like, "Are these the guys?" We're like, "Yeah, those are the guys." And the people on the balconies and in the street are like, "Yeah, those are the guys. Those are the guys." And the police say, "Okay, we want to take you to the station to just write up a report because apparently these guys have been causing trouble." And they say the station's a little ways away. You have to get in the cop car with us. And we got 2 cop cars. We'll put the guys who mugged you in one car, and you'll go in this other one. But in the car, the police, and my Spanish is okay at this point. It's certainly far better than it was at that Mexico-Guatemala border. Right. But
what year is this? Just for
this is 2014.
Okay.
So this is fairly recently. This is 7 years ago, as we're talking now. So I'm also, I'm in my 40s at this point, and my students are my one student maybe 30, but the other 2 are early 20s, and none of them have any Spanish that's coming up in this moment. Like, some of them have some formal Spanish, but like they've never had to use it in real life before. So it's really not emerging. And the cops start saying, well, maybe we should take me to a different station away from your students, so that you can give us a special private police report. Like, there's so many ways, there's so many things that could mean, and none of them I can imagine are good. And I'm not going there. And so I report to my students what has been proposed, and I say, so we're not doing this. And I now don't know like what this scene is that we're in. I now don't know if the police came as a show to the community, and that these guys are actually not going to get booked. So let's just make sure we're on the same page. And no matter what, we don't separate. Like, the 4 of us are together until we get back to the hostel. We don't let them move us into different rooms or different places at all. And so we get to this station, which is very, very close.
By the way, it's worth noting at this point that your concern there was not unfounded. That it is shouldn't be particularly jarring to anybody in South America to hear that could have potentially been the case. And it's why I asked you if you're aware of any cartel or gang connection there. Was the possibility that there could be some police influence. There were all sorts of. I spent 3 months in Colombia, and in Colombia, they're especially in Cartagena in the north on the sort of Caribbean coast, you end up in these situations. I met quite a few backpackers who like tried to buy weed. They constantly sell people cocaine, marijuana, all the time, just on the streets trying to sell. And at hostels, some of these kids are trying to buy some of that stuff. And the number of stories of little sort of gimmicks that were set up where somebody would, he'd take 40,000 Colombian pesos off you for a bag of whatever. And you'd thank very much, walk around the corner, a cop picks you up because that guy just said that gringo right there in the white shirt. And then that guy takes a bribe from you, and then he gives the bag of coke back to the drug dealer. He's just got this little spiral going, this little circle. It's quite nifty and brilliant, but if you're in Cartagena, don't buy the weed. All this to say that the you can't necessarily trust that the police are going to be on your side if you're victimized in some way.
Exactly. And I don't know. My sense, we did get to the station, and there was at least one cop who seemed very much on the up and up. But he was resisting what a couple of the other cops were telling us that we should be doing.
I see.
And at some point, this woman comes in with a tiny baby in arms, crying. And, I don't know, but my gut instinct was this looks staged. Something about this, I don't know who this is, but I don't know what's about to happen here. And she starts saying in very slow, clear Spanish, in the way that a woman in Quito, who doesn't have experience with gringos and wasn't otherwise being set up to say a story that was going to be understood by the gringos with bad Spanish, would necessarily have been doing. So I would have expected a much more emotional outpouring, but she said in a Spanish that I could easily understand, "He's my brother. We rely on him for our food, for our family and my baby. And please don't press charges." And I thought, I don't actually think this is this guy's sister. So there was the main guy, this Scarface, and then there was the guy we'd passed on the stairs who seemed to be the associate and seemed to actually be scared and seemed to not really be unhappy about being in the situation. But Scarface, whose now alleged sister, shows up at the police station, babe in arms, crying, explaining that we rely on him for our food money, is just smirking and arrogant throughout. He's the only thing that he's upset about is he didn't get away with it. And we are finally told by the policeman who I read as totally honest, and maybe they all were, I hope they all were, but the policeman that I really read as 100% totally honest, comes over to us and says, this is going to take forever, and you're going to have to come back in 4 days and do another police report. I said, we're not going to be here in 4 days. This is the beginning of a study. We're not going to be here. And, he starts saying, look, don't tell them, don't tell the other policemen where you're going to be. Or where you're staying now. And I really think that you should be doing a police report, but they're going to make it very hard. So it's up to you. And I think if I were you, I wouldn't do it. So I said, okay, well then I just want to be able to confront the guys who attacked us. And so I asked my students to walk up with me to these two guys who are, I can't remember if they were handcuffed or not, but they were standing there. And I just said as clearly as I could in my deeply mediocre Spanish, what you did to us and what it seems like you're doing to your neighborhood isn't going to serve you, and you need to stop. And the guy just laughed at me. Actually, Scarface just laughed. And then we got a ride home in a police truck with a police escort in front with the siren going. So the police car, so the police car in front is the siren going, and then we're in this. I think it was a truck in back, and it's clearly we're being convoyed. And then every time we would get stuck in traffic, because by now it's deeply traffic time in Quito. It's 4, 5, 6 something, and literally at one point, and so all four of us are jammed into the back of this truck seat, and we pull up next to someone, a car next to us, a taxi with a young mother and a young child. And my student Arthur, super nice, super sweet, just sees the little kid in the window waving, and my student does this. And the mom, who sees that we're part of a police convoy, shades her child's eyes and pulls them away. We're not the bad guys here.
We're the victims, not the criminals.
I don't know how we ended up in a police convoy appearing to be the criminals of Quito at this point.
But also, just think of the optics. The mother who saw you sees these white people in the back of these must be international masterminds of some kind, because they're not only in a police cruiser, they're in this this convoy rolling down the streets with an escort. If we got Jason Bourne in the back of this car.
That's right. Yeah, so we had him drop us off several blocks from our hostel, just because of what the policeman, who really seemed totally forthright, had said. You maybe don't want any of these guys knowing exactly where you are. And we walked back, and by the time we got back to the hostel, all the rest of the students were there. So this was supposed to be the beginning of the study abroad trip. And we walked in, and they're oh, Heather's here. And okay, great. The rest of the students are here. And we're we're going to need a drink, and welcome to study abroad, but we have a story to tell you.
Oh my God. For anybody on that study abroad trip who that was their first time maybe leaving home in any serious way, that would, first of all, for the people who were involved, but then just second of all, if you just show up and your teacher mentor who's supposed to be leading the trip just face this experience and is probably, I would imagine, visibly rattled in that moment. That'd be a pretty terrifying way to start.
Indeed. Yeah. And I had a few students who were really experienced in travel, and who also, really not only in travel and adventure travel, but also in it had life-saving skills. And, everyone already knew, and I sort of identified them as like, you guys are my backup, and they weren't involved in the mugging. And so I was able to be like, okay, can you keep an eye on the mood and on the emotions that are now going to be emerging? Because, it's going to be hard to get to normal very quickly here.
That super productive that you had some sort of like people who could be relied upon, some people who are maybe stepping up as leaders in that situation. That's really nice.
It's necessary, I think. Yeah. So that was me getting mugged in Quito with my 3 students. Yeah.
Wow.
Hey there. My name's Will. I think you probably already know that. If you're enjoying this conversation and you want access to sneak footage behind the scenes, blah, 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 my marketing's not so good. But yeah, you get the idea. Text member to 332-877-9540 or go to heybagageclaim.com/support. See you out there.
So yeah, you and I have spent, both of us have spent a fair amount of time in the Amazon, if I'm not mistaken, although mine was Peruvian and yours was somewhere else in the Amazon. Where were you?
Yeah, I've been in Brazil just once for a few weeks, and then I've spent a fair bit of time in the Ecuadorian Amazon, which is just extraordinary. God, it's the western Ecuadorian Amazon, the Western Amazon, Eastern Ecuador, is understood to be actually the most biodiverse spot on Earth. It has, because it's got, because it's still got some of the Andean stuff that is creeping in, and it's got the vast Amazon to the east and to some degree the north and the south, and just a coming together of so many different ways of being that, God.
That's fascinating. So do you have like the vicuña sort of fauna of Peru and Chile, and then intersecting with the Amazon? Is that
no, like it's not, you don't actually get the Andean, like the stuff that you would recognize as high Andean.
Sure. Yeah.
But
I guess you're not at elevation. So that
exactly. You're not at elevation. You're like, practically at sea level, which is amazing given how far inland you are. Like usually there's some rise, but the Amazon is just like flat all the way to the Atlantic, practically, very low slope. But it's more that the Andes concede diversity. So it's not that the organisms adapted to altitude come down into it, but that things can adapt into the lower elevation. And the Amazon itself is obviously ridiculously diverse, but at the edges that are intact in terms of ecosystem wise, but have a different set of environmental parameters, it's even more diverse.
Unreal. That must be absolutely wild. Something I talked with Bridget Fedesi on the show a couple of weeks ago. She's absolutely wonderful and hilarious in that interview. Within 3 minutes, she's like drugged out in some crazy place in Sri Lanka. It's the most absurd. She is a riot. She's actually wonderful. Maybe, when you go back and edit podcasts, you can see, you edit both tracks and you can see your own narration than the other person's. I had maybe 3 minutes of speaking time in that whole episode. It was great. Anyway, I had her on the show and we were talking about, she spent a lot of time in the Australian bush. And one thing that she spoke about that I felt really strongly about in my time in the Amazon was the auditory experience. Like the sun goes down, you just get overcome by this cacophony of everything. Some sounds familiar, you get that gentle hum of crickets that you're going to get in North America, but you're also going to get overpowered by all sorts of weird sounds that you're just completely not familiar with. Yeah,
No,
it's the most beautiful
absolutely.
experience.
Absolutely. No, it's totally extraordinary at every level. One of the things that I used to ask my students to do was spend time in nature attuned to one of a series of senses. And so, we're visual. We have these, like, we're primates. We have these eyes that face forward with our binocular vision. And that allows us to imagine that the world is mostly a visual place. But, like, try to, close your eyes, be in nature, close your eyes and see what you can smell, see what you can hear, see what you can touch, be careful, see what you can taste, be careful, but, within reason. And you just end up with a totally different vision. And again, all of our metaphors are going to be visual mostly, but you have a totally different like image again of what it is that you're in amongst.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily have a follow up to that, and I don't know that I have to. Although one thing I'm thinking about is something about the Amazon for me was intensely spiritual. We can talk ayahuasca and that in a moment, but even before that, even just in a couple of things happen even in big cities. I take it if you're in Brazil, you're probably in Manaus or somewhere. I spent a fair amount I haven't been to Manaus, but in Iquitos and in Peru, and then on down the river from there. Even in the city, the relative relationship with nature is such that whereas in New York, you can kind of be under the impression, New York or Phoenix or any city over 20,000 people, you can be under the false illusion that humans successfully conquered nature in some way. You go to these places and nature feels so inherently big, and it's so infused into the culture that they know that nature is more powerful and they're just kind of this bobbing cork in the ocean. And it's so intensely imbued in the culture. And then on top of that, you get these sonic layers and smells. And if you spend any time meditating, the idea of paying attention to a single thing, focus on the breath, right? But if you just close your eyes and you spend time in the Amazon and listen to this cacophony, the inside of your mind actually becomes uninteresting when you get forced into a meditative state in a way that's really, really fascinating.
That's beautiful. I like that, forced into a meditative state.
Yeah,
that's wonderful. And I agree about the Amazon. I feel at home there, and in a way that I never did. I lived over the course of several field seasons for over a year in Madagascar, and it was extraordinary. But I never felt at home there in the way that I do in the Amazon.
Was the Amazon your first experience in South America?
Boy, I guess actually it was. So that I went, excuse me, I went to Manaus for a conference. This would have been in like 2003. And I went a week and a half early and did a few side trips actually into the forest, into the flooded forest, and some of the terra firma forest, and then was at this conference in Manaus. It was.
That is a grand entry into South America. Oh my gosh.
Oh, it was extraordinary. And I came back from that trip saying, okay, Bret, like maybe we should do research in Brazil. Like gotta do that. Like I really need to get back there right away. And then, then I got pregnant, and so that changed everything. And I've never yet been back to the Brazilian Amazon, but have been to the Ecuadorian Amazon a number of times. And like you say, I can say this without feeling any irony or any glitch in my head as an evolutionary biologist, but it feels spiritual. And as so many cultures throughout the world have discovered ways into the spiritual realm with the the plants or fungus or whatever that's available to them. So, so exactly as you mentioned before, so there is ayahuasca famously emerging from the Amazon, this combination. And, it's not even a single combination, right? Like it varies slightly depending on where in the Amazon you are, what exactly the ingredients are. And boy, I didn't do my homework. I can't remember. I think that there's 1 or 2 ingredients of ayahuasca that are always there, and then a few others that vary depending on where you are.
I have a layman's understanding. I'm not going to be able to identify the actual chemical compounds or anything, but I know that there are basically 2 plant components. One actually contains the DMT, which is the active ingredient really in ayahuasca. The plant that does that, those are diverse and relatively common in the Amazon. They have tons of those. But your body's ability to digest it in a way that creates the reaction that the psychedelic experience that ayahuasca is, that is a separate plant that is much more rare and found on the opposite side of the of the rainforest from most of the common DMT containing plants. And so from my perspective, what's fascinating is that people have been doing ayahuasca for thousands of years. How the hell did they get these 2 plants together? How did they figure out that? Just little moments like that you find fascinating, that they opposite sides of the jungle in a very different technological space and time.
Yeah, I've never heard the opposite sides thing before. So it may be that in some places they're that, and some places they're together. But still, I mean, I wonder this thing even about single ingredient things. Like, how did people end up drinking coffee? Given that the coffee plant, as you know, you've traveled in Latin America, like the coffee plant just has like the berries are tasty, but they don't remind you of coffee. And like, how do you vanilla? So where I worked in Madagascar, vanilla was being grown and harvested by these, solo farmers. Like, how do we get there? How do we get from like orchids, which is like thousands of species, and there's literally one that humans have figured out how to harvest and dry and cure, and then it's extraordinary. Human ingenuity is extraordinary, and ayahuasca is one remarkable example of this.
Yeah. And then just another example, simple thing. I was chopping onions the other night. I was crying. How did somebody get to that point with an onion and think this probably isn't poisonous? Let's keep going.
Yeah, I'm excited about this.
Obviously, it's turned out to be a very valuable food, but I don't understand how we got past opening the onion.
I agree. I'd never thought about that. Maybe it was the greens first. Maybe it was like the green parts. So, people adding that and then just like working their way down to the bulb. Yeah. And, maybe I don't actually know this, but maybe the really strong onion response that we have now is the product of our selection on onions. I don't actually know, but we may have made it stronger the way we've made a lot of things stronger.
That's a good point. That could be absolutely true, that the onions of 10,000 years ago didn't have quite the same impact. On the coffee point, Michael, and then we'll go into ayahuasca in more detail, but Michael Pollan, who's a wonderful author of Omnivore's Dilemma, How to Change Your Mind, all sorts of interesting books. I recently heard in an interview, there's no evidence of this being true necessarily, but there's a sort of timeline correlation between the discovery and sort of universality of coffee and tea in the Arab worlds with the sort of, most of Europe was suffering a terrible time in the Middle Ages. The Arab world was going through sort of a wonderful cultural revolution, discoveries in mathematics and science and various things. And Michael Pollan made a pretty compelling case that coffee actually might have been the catalyst for that, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. I'd be interested to hear that argument. But at first hearing, that makes sense. That makes potential sense. And it's not. I went looking. We're way off in the weeds here, but when I was pregnant with my first child, I went looking at, for all of the evidence, for all of the things we're told not to do, and specifically dug deep into coffee. And I just, I ended up in the scientific literature finding all of this evidence for its benefits and no evidence for its harms. And, yes, if you can't wake up and not have coffee without shaking or getting headaches, then you're an addict and you probably need to back off a little bit. Yeah. But, it's a remarkable plant.
Yeah. Ayahuasca. Speaking of remarkable plants, I know we're running light on time, but you and I have both done ayahuasca, and both done ayahuasca. I don't want to be persnickety about it, but in the location that ayahuasca was intended to be done, in the I talk a lot about set and setting is very, very important in terms of consumption of psychedelics. Doing ayahuasca in the Amazon, you're really not going to come up with a better setting for that experience. Can you set up your setting for me a little bit? What was your experience?
Yeah. So I'm gonna leave a little bit vague just to protect some people. But it was the son of a shaman, and he was very, very clear when he was called a shaman. He's like, I am not, but my father was, and I know the ways. And he prepared for a few of us a brew that was that knocked us off our feet. And I've done plenty of hallucinogens in the past. It had been a while at that point. So this would have been in 2017, actually. Okay. No. That's when Evergreen blew up. 2016, the year before. And it's different. It's different from mushrooms. It's certainly different from acid. It's more all body pulverizing.
Tell me more about that.
So for me it was an extraordinarily strong purgative, and so you throw up a lot afterwards, and there's a way in which focusing on that feels like, well, why would you even talk about that? That's obviously the worst part. Once the visions start coming, isn't that the thing? And I think actually the extraordinarily negative first part of the experience, and I honestly have no idea how long that was. It feels like it was probably a few hours, but who knows? I think is necessary because you just wrecked. You're thinking like, whatever decisions that I made that got me to doing this here now were wrong. Like whatever, like I trust myself not at all now. This was an error.
Interesting.
This was a disastrous choice. And I never lost track of like, this too will pass. Like I never thought it was permanent, but it felt unending in the moment, and so excruciating and painful and awful that I could not imagine why I would trust myself with any decision that could have gotten me there. And so then when that phase of it passed, and the night sky sort of opens up into all sorts of magic, I could be more receptive to it.
Were you doing this with your eyes closed? There's a small detail, but
sometimes yes, sometimes no. Okay. And I think it's interesting to see. It was nighttime, and it's interesting to have your eyes open in a daytime would be too much. Like it lets in too much light, right? Yeah. But at nighttime, where the light that's available is very dim, being able to see some things and seeing what your brain will do with them, seeing what kind of sense your visual apparatus will do with the things that it can see is fascinating. And then taking that away entirely by closing your eyes and just saying, okay, like go wild, go fractal, go sort of like, steampunk engineering, organismal fractal, and, fold in on yourself and, just, reveal it all. And, having experienced what was, I've never quite grasped what people mean when they say ego death, but I think that early phase of like, this is the stupidest thing I could ever have done to myself. How could I trust myself to make any further decisions? Was a kind of like release of ego or release of agency, so that then once the full visuals and the not horrible part of the experience was happening, I could just be like, okay, this is now what this is, and I'm not here to judge. Like, that's not the
Yeah.
judging part of me. I've already assessed was wrong. So let's leave that out of it now, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. Heather, we have very little time. I know you have another meeting. That was a ridiculous and wonderful place to end. I will probably via email aggressively ask you to come back on the show another time.
I would enjoy that.
Just to complete the thread on that, because I have so many thoughts there. But before I let you go, you have a new book that you and Bret have put together. I think that's coming out in the fall sometime. You want to tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, it is A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. It's coming out in September of 2021. It's a book we've been talking about writing for over a decade. I remember actually talking to my students about it in a comparative anatomy lab in like 2010. So the idea is, yes, we're hunter-gatherers, but we're also industrialists and agriculturalists, and we're also mammals, and we're also fish. We're all of these things. We're all parts of our history, and all of those parts of our history, all those moments in our history have left a mark. And so how can we use an evolutionary understanding, not just of what we are from our deep history, but also from our most recent history as like post-industrialists, to better live lives of full productivity and respect for all and everyone around us. And so, it's super broad. Our agent actually called it the everything book. We talk about medicine and our bodies. We talk about food. We talk about sleep, sex and gender, relationship, parenthood, childhood, school, ways to be a functioning adult, and society level solutions to what we see as society level problems. So it kind of, it's the gamut.
I love it. I love it. Theory of everything books are the best, by the way. Even if, every single time you got to let a few premises slide when it goes that broad. But I'm excited. It's going to be a blast. Heather, where can folks find you? Where can folks follow your work? What do you recommend?
Great. So I guess at the moment, my website is probably it's going to be improved, and there's going to be new things coming out soon, but not yet. So heatherhying.com, and you can also find me on Twitter at Heather E. Hying. That's Heying.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, Heather, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Will. It's been a pleasure.